Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke with some course breakdown action for the third major of the year, the US Open. We're heading over to LA, Los Angeles Country Club, a historic venue that it's really our first time getting to see for professional major championship play. So looking forward to that, but also a little bit of a new mystery, a little bit of a new puzzle to go out there and try and figure out. So we'll go through everything at LA, a hole by hole breakdown, our comps, key stats, all of the usual to make sure you know what to expect to go out there, play your PGA DFS lineups, or of course to go out there and fire a few outright bets. We're looking to try and gain an edge from the course breakdown perspective, and with so many different videos outlining the course, a lot of public data on LACC, I think we've got what we need to go out there and do exactly that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing started. LACC is a historic design. It was made by George C. Thomas, 1927, and has had a lot of different renovations throughout the years, but all of the ones of late have been trying to restore it to its true intentions, right? What George C. Thomas laid out. So you have a very natural landscape. The barrancas are something you're going to hear about just time and time again this week. In fact, if you had a drinking game every time they said barranca, you'd probably end up with a liver transplant by the end of the week. But this track, it's beautiful, it's aesthetically pleasing, it's directly in downtown LA, right, just south of Beverly Hills, just to the west of West Hollywood out there, and I'm excited to be there in person. Going to be an absolute ball out there, but more than anything, this is a ball striking test. That's the one thing that's evident from this. It's relatively wide open off the tee, but kind of like what you have at the Memorial, even with wide landing areas, when you miss the fairways, you are going to pay for it. There's the barrancas that come into play. If you don't know what a barranca is, it's like a sandy little riverbed that may have water in it if it's a really rainy part of the year, but more often than not, it's just going to be little sand, natural area that you can probably hit out of, but some nasty, gnarly lies down there. So there are pretty much barrancas on every hole. You've got a lot of wooded areas that can cause you trouble, really penal sand bunkers, that rustic old-time style, kind of like you saw in an Oak Hill Country Club. And overall, when you get offline, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. The rough is a Bermuda grass this week, which for a West Coast golf course is extremely rare. We don't see it much on the PGA Tour. The reason for that is our West Coast swing for the PGA Tour comes a lot earlier in the year when grasses like Bermuda cannot live, especially out there in those kind of conditions. During the summer months, though, especially at a course with the kind of budget that an LACC has, they can sustain Bermuda grass. And in fact, they have it at 3 to 4 inches right now, but it's real thick. In Bermuda grass, a lot more penal than its counterparts, the Kentucky bluegrass, a Paspalum rough that would be 3-4 inches. Bermuda grass is about as sticky and gnarly, grainy as you are going to find. So this golf course, its main defense would be the rough, it'd be the sand bunkering. Off the tee, right, you're gonna have a lot of room in the greens. They're not massive, they're not aircraft carrier size like what you see with some of the ones there in St. Andrews, but they're medium to large in a lot of cases. So you've got the firm, fast conditions, it's a target practice. Hitting the right sections of greens is going to be a huge factor this week. Because just like the other George C. Thomas design that we see a lot on the PGA Tour, Riviera Country Club, there's a ton of undulation on these greens, different tiers to them. If you're missing the wrong section, it's pretty much like you're missing the green altogether. You'll see players having to chip from one section of the green to the other because taking a direct line with the putter just sometimes isn't possible. It's a difficult strategic kind of track. So because we don't have a lot of data on it, right, there's no data from 2022 or 2021 that can bring up like most of our course breakdowns here. I think most of what we're going to learn is hole by hole, which we'll go through here in just a few minutes. It's a par 70, 7,400 yards. The greens are going to be running at about 13 on the stimp meter, so certainly fast. I'd expect them to be firm as well. They have gotten a little bit of rain in the area, most notably today. Over there in LA, got a good amount of rain. It dumped down there, but they have sub-airs on site, and it is looking like it's going to be at least somewhat sunny this week. So I'm expecting them to try and just get these as firm, as concrete, as bouncy as possible out there. We already know they're going to be running at 13. teens. We have a pure distinction bent grass as the green type this week. The collars are that same type of bent grass, and it says they're cut to maintain the speed. I've heard from a few members that they're double cutting them, that they're double rolling them every single day, that undoubtedly they're probably going to be firm too if they're double rolling them every single day. So it's a pure distinction creeping bent grass, to give you the exact type there. And the rough, which is very atypical here, it's a Tifway 2 Bandera Bermuda grass. So not the usual, bent POA that you'll see at a course like, the Farmers Insurance Open, Pebble Beach over there. They get a lot of POA kind of grasses. This is true Bermuda grass, which is going to be gnarly. It's not as much of a factor off the tee because of the large landing areas, but around the green, when you're missing greens, that is going to be where it comes into play. So it'll be penal. It's mostly going to be a problem around the green. Most of the recent renovations, like I talked about, have been trying to return some of the rustic, natural look. A lot of work was done on the barrancas. The greens were made a little bit more severe, and also the bunkers, like I said, kind of similar to the Oak Hill ones, are pretty nasty as well. So from the winning score perspective, I do think it'll be a little bit easier than most US Opens, but it's not going to get out of hand, right? It's still a par 70. There are still only 3 par 5s on site. So there are a few drivable par 4s, as we'll go through here in a second. A couple of the par 5s are easily reachable in 2, but anytime you're missing a green around here, it's going to be next to impossible to get up and down. So it'll be a ball strikers fest. The people that can keep themselves in position, score on the easy holes, are going to be the ones that you see at the top of the board towards the end of the week. So let's take it hole by hole now. First off, hole number 1 is a handshake par 5. And these are the type of landing areas I'm talking about, right? I mean, here at the Canadian Open this week, you'd probably have about half the landing area here to land your drive. Well, you're going to have plenty of room. And though the rough can come in play if you get a little bit offline there, most players aren't going to have to navigate it. These bunkers, if anything, are a little bit more in play than the rough, I would say. And as long as you hit the short stuff, you're reaching this thing into, right? It's 579, 580 with the firm and fast fairways out there. Players aren't going to have trouble at least getting it greenside in 2. Now, it's a relatively small surface. Everything does slope right to left, so if you get it running on the front, you can access some of the middle to back pins via slope, but it's a good birdie look at the very least for a majority of the field. Hole 2 is a 500-yard par 4, so you get the handshake on 1, you get the slap across the face in 2. If you miss the fairway here, you're almost for sure going to be laying up in front of this little barranca there. There's the infamous barranca that you're going to see all around the course. It's that little like sandy kind of area that you see. So small green, relatively narrow green. That's going to be tricky with a bunch of different types of undulation on it. Probably like a par 4.5 is what they were calling it. Hole 3 is 424. This is a birdie look, I would say. It's a really tricky green. This molar-shaped green is one of the more sloped on the entire course. So you're going to have you could probably lay up on this hole and still have a wedge in, especially some of the longer players on tour. But if you wanted to be more aggressive off the tee with the firm and fast fairways, a drive of 335 is realistic for, I'd say, at least half the field. Some of the elite tier drivers, Cam Young's, Rory McIlroy's, might be able to sniff the front of this green. So it depends on wind direction. If the prevailing wind ends up being into here at hole number 3, you might not have that opportunity, but that's at least worth considering, especially how wide that landing area is. There's no rough in front of the green that's protecting it. Hole number 4 is 232. It's one of the infamous par 3s here on site, and this one, I believe, only plays like 232. I don't think this is one that they shorten or make much longer, but small surface, a bunch of undulation. There's 5 par 3s on property, so that's part of it being a unique par 70. There's 5 par 5s, you have 3 par 3s, so a little bit atypical there, and every single par 3 is among the best of all the par 3s in the entire country. They get raving reviews. Everyone that plays LACC, all they can talk about are these par 3s. So I know it looks a little bit benign from the overhead view. Just know that it's more than likely going to be one of the more entertaining holes. You can't see all the slope on here. You can't really get an appreciation for it, but that's what makes this course special. Hole 5 is 484, and tell me that doesn't look like an aircraft carrier out there, right? That fairway is just super wide. It's super straight in both directions. If you miss this fairway, get better. Just golf better is what I have to say to you. But 484, the approach shot is no easy shot, right? It's easy to hit the fairway, but it's really difficult to hit the right section of the screen. It's shaped like little beer goggles there, little ski mask, I guess would be a better way to put it. You have these two greenside bunkers that I'm sure are going to be a problem. It's off the tee here. You can see it's not really that much of an issue. Maybe on the par fives, right? You want to be really good off the tee. But it's more about the approach play around the green play than anything. I think if you're going to specialize here, you can drive this green. This Barranca is just hazardous, I think is the best way to put it. You're going to get some really crappy lies if you end up hitting it into the Barranca. You can try and drive it over here to the corner. It requires you to slice it around the corner, though. It's a completely blind shot, too, which poses a few issues. And I'd expect a lot of guys to just lay up and then hit the easy wedge shot, but you'll have a few crazy mofos go for it. That's a hole that I'll definitely be sitting on this week. Hole 7 is 295. This is a hole that they can shorten and make just 200 yards. So this is one of the highly adaptable par threes here. If they're playing it from the tips, it can play 312 yards. It's an absolute bear. I mean, even if it's just playing 200 yards, this bunker is extremely deep. You have all the fairway, runoff areas that are all around the screen. Just a brute, especially if you get out of position on that hole. Hole 8 is 554. This is reachable in 2 if you hit a good drive. The fairway does camber from left to right, which kind of helps you out with the angle here, because ideally you need to be close enough to the right side of this fairway to hit a little draw around it into the green. The problem is you also can't be too close to the trees on the right, or else you can't start the ball far enough right to actually draw it onto the green, or if you're a lefty, fade it onto the green. So it's a really tricky shot. If you're going to set like an optimal target, these guys, right, if they can get the ball like right here where I have this little marker, they'll have a good chance to go for it in 2 and perhaps make an eagle. If not, a lot of them are going to have to lay up. You just have the trees here that maybe don't look that tall here from the overhead looks, completely obstruct your view. Hole 9 is 181. Again, these par threes, you can't really get a full appreciation for them with the overhead views, but a ton of slope on this green, and depending on pin location, could be one of the tougher holes in the course. Hole 10 is 375. Look at this fairway. Just massively wide. This one's all about the layup and then just attacking this hole with the wedge. So definitely a birdie look, but trickier than it looks like overhead. I can tell you that much. This hole is 290 yards. This is an absolute brute too. Tiny green. Only that one bunker to worry about, but all of this is fairway area where you can end up running off. It's really tricky. Hole 12 is 389. Another just driver wedge. This course, right, it's going to have a bunch of birdies. You're going to have somebody, the winning score is probably going to be at least 10 under par. But if you get out of position, you miss these greens, and they're tiny. I mean, look how narrow this surface is. It's especially narrow at the angle that you're coming in on here. It's not an easy golf course, particularly with some of that nasty Bermuda rough. Hole 13, 512. It's a longer par 4, but again, a massive landing area off the tee. Hole 14 is 631, dogleg from left to right. This one's not so reachable in 2, right? This is a really long par 5, but still a birdie look for most of the field because you have such a wide landing area off the tee. It's kind of hard to get out of position. And God forbid if you do, you're screwed. Hole 15 is the most intriguing hole in the golf course. I know it's listed at 131, but this will play at 78 yards on Saturday. I've been told that already. It's already in writing from people from the USGA. I believe if they use this front pin and they use like one of these middle tee boxes, they did for the Walker Cup the last time it was played at LACC, it played 78 yards, and it was still difficult. So it's going to be a fun hole to watch. And you can see they have those pin locations to the back left. They can make it a lot longer, or they can make it play a lot shorter like they will on Saturday. Hole 16 is 506 yards, a longer par 4, but once again, as long as you're not out of position, like it's doable. Like there's one bunker protecting this. You hit the green, you're probably getting out of here with a par and happy with it. You get out of position, you're probably looking at double though. Hole 17 is 527. Once again, it's all about hitting the fairway. So off the tee here is, I would say, at least on the more difficult holes, probably we're going to see a lot of separation from the field, right? But on most of the other holes, I'd say like 12 to 14 of them, right? It's all about the approach play and around the green. So I think you need to be a well-rounded player, right? Especially if you're going to go out there and win this event. But driving really comes into play on these last 3 holes, right? Maybe not for the first 14, 15 holes, maybe just 1 or 2 exceptions. But 16, 17, and 18, you got to, get it out there, right? The guys that can hit it a super long way here, you have unlimited room off the tee to drive it. You're going to have a much easier shot into this green. They'll be firm. We know how much undulation you have on every surface out here. So the closer you can get to the hole, the better. So driving distance definitely looks like it's going to be a huge factor, particularly for that closing stretch. Now that we've seen the golf course, let's go through our key stats for the week, the different types of metrics I'm using to identify my top plays and bets. So first off, we've got shots gained approach. That's the most important stat for pretty much every week on tour. 1, maybe 2 exceptions the entire year, but at major championships, we know it's all about the irons, right? The top 10, top 20 finishers are always, or at least mostly, the guys that are in the top 10, top 20 on the approach rankings. So that's not a surprise there. The thing to kind of hone in on, you're going to have a lot of medium to long irons, right? Especially in some of those longer par 4s. You're going to have plenty of wedges too. So maybe taking a look at some of the long or wedge specialists might be a way to look at that. But the one range that might be a little bit overlooked, I would say would be like 125 to 150 and then 150 to 175. A majority of those iron shots are going to be closer to like a 6-7 iron, maybe longer, or a degreed wedge. So there's really no in between out there. But more than anything, just look at the best approach players, right? They're always some of the better players on tour anyways, but especially for DFS or maybe for outright bets, looking at some of the better iron players coming in, right? That are trending in the right direction, that maybe the last 3-4 events, the last 1-2 months have gone out there, gained consistently. Those players are going to be at a huge advantage around LACC, where you have to be on control of your golf ball. At number 2, we've got shots gained off the tee, right? So driving distance, I think, is going to be really the more important factor here. So driving accuracy, pretty much non-existent in my model this week. You've got those 50 to 60 yard wide fairways. So shots gained off the tee, you probably should have put in parentheses driving distance. It's really that driving distance factor we're looking for. Holes 16 through 18 are really going to highlight that. The guys that can just lash at it, hit it 350, 360, might even have wedge into those holes, or at the very most going to have a mid iron. So they're going to be at a huge advantage compared to the rest of the field that might have 200 yards plus in a few cases, if not like 220 to 230 in. So I think you're going to see a lot of separation in terms of driving distance. It's not even just that. You've got the drivable par 4s. You've got just the driving distance inherently being more valuable than a lot of other stats out there. So keep a little eye on that too, right? Especially for US Open setups. We've seen that bias in the past. And lastly, we've got shots gained putting on bent grass. So putting at this track, I think, is going to come into play because of how tricky the greens are. They're running fast. They have a ton of undulation to them. I'm expecting to see plenty of 3-putts, and I think the 5 to 10 foot make percentage might be a little bit lower this week than what you're used to seeing. So being able to cash in when you give yourself good birdie looks, I think, is going to be a key way to differentiate yourself. A close fourth, I guess I didn't mention on here, would be shots gained around the green. So trying to take guys that can go out there, save par out of that really deep Bermuda rough. You've got really difficult chipping areas, whether it's the rough, where you're going to have that nasty 4-inch Bermuda, but also those little shaved off chipping areas, right? It's not all rough out there. We had plenty of examples of those little chipping hollows that could be also tricky. So I know Victor Hovland, right? Guys like, maybe Colin Morikawa are really good out of those rough shots, but maybe not so much off of those fairway cut kind of around the green shots. So I think you have to be an around the green player that can get it done in both kind of scenarios, because LACC is really good with the way that they defend the golf course, where they have both kind of around the green shots available. So Southern Hills was the same kind of way. Unironically, right, Justin Thomas went out there and absolutely killed it that week because he's a player that has shown an affinity to go out on both of those type of surfaces and find success around the green. So I'm looking for really good around the green players at an Oak Hill, but also a really good around the green player like a TPC Sawgrass, where you get a lot of those fairway cuts. Taking a look at birdie or better percentage, that's always important, particularly for fantasy. Taking a look at Riviera course history, which is my top comp course this week, but specifically, especially because it's a George C. Thomas design, looking at Riviera on its own. And then, of course, the rest of our comp courses, which we'll hop into right now. In terms of our comps this week, at number 1, I already kind of spilled the beans, right? We've got Riviera Country Club, another George C. Thomas design, but also a course where you've got really tricky greens, really difficult around the green shots, shaved off areas, also areas with a bunch of rough. So I think there's enough crossover to make it a comp course, but unfortunately the agronomy is not the same, right? Different time of the year, no Bermuda grass rough to worry about. So there are a few changes. I would say maybe a few more long irons around Riviera, but still I think a decent comp course to look at, and one that I'm especially using in my modeling this week. Like in terms of comps, I'm using it 2-3 times more than the next two. The reason for that, we don't have a huge sample size, right? So I think, I like Augusta National. I like Torrey Pines South course as a few comp courses to look at, mostly because they have difficult greens. Torrey Pines also has that lush rough, right? It's really an off the tee heavy course. So I like a few of the trends we're looking at, but LACC is an unknown, right? It's a track we haven't seen before. And a lot of times these comp courses come from correlation analysis, right? Especially looking at some of the leaderboards. And that's not something that we can do at LACC yet. So I'm hesitant to go out there and full on use these as comps, but Augusta National, right, especially difficult around the green, I think you can consider that. Torrey Pines, also worth considering from the ball striking perspective and from the tricky green perspective too. So the South course is the main course for the Farmers Insurance Open. They do play the North course for one round there. The US Open they played at Torrey Pines was only at the South course. So I think if you're going to look at any specific leaderboard, maybe the major championship they played at Torrey Pines might be the best way about going out there and doing so. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the course breakdown. Appreciate all the support here and gonna have tons of content dropping for the US Open. So keep an eye out tomorrow for our core plays, our value plays that'll be dropping, and of course our weekly DFS live stream, our betting stream too. It'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. I'll be over there at LA. I'll be walking the course for the practice round there. So I'll have a little bit of insider knowledge and of course all the DFS content, all of the analysis for props, outright bets that you guys love to go out there and hopefully make it a really good week. So I'm stoked for it. I'm already on the high of a US Open week. So hopefully you guys are as excited for the action as me. Go out there, hit the like button on the way out, but also comment what you think the winning score is going to be. I think it's going to play easier than most would expect to see at a US Open. It will be firm and fast. I think they're going to do what they can to defend the course, pick tricky pin locations, that sort of thing. But 18 under par might actually end up winning this thing. Like, I'm going to go out there and take a stand. So go ahead, let me know your thoughts. There are people with hot takes saying they think over par is going to win this thing. I'm definitely on the other end of it.